Hi everyone, my name's Liam. I'm a product manager at Google, working on Google Maps. Before that, I was a program manager at Microsoft, and I've founded a few startups in the past. So today we're going to be talking about a topic a lot of you have been asking about: how to get into product management from a non-technical background. And today we have the interview that will help out a ton with that. So today we're going to be interviewing Justin. And Justin actually went through this process. Him and I met 2 years ago, and he went through a rotation as being a product manager on our team, and then actually eventually joined our team as a product manager. And he's been crushing it since then. So what better way than to ask someone who actually went through this process and get their tips and tricks on how they made that transition. So I'll just give a heads up. The interview is pretty long. It's around 20 minutes. But I've got some chapter markers over here. Hopefully they'll appear. I'll put them here post-edit. And you can skip around and go to the areas that are most relevant to you. Justin has a ton of amazing insights that I think are going to help everyone get through this process, going from a non-technical background into PM. So enough of me talking. Let's jump into the interview. Hey everyone, I'm Liam. Today we're going to be talking to Justin, who's a product manager at Google. We're going to learn a bit more about how he got into product, how he internal transferred within Google, his background. We have a bunch of questions for him today. So yeah, Justin, tell us about your story so far.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Liam. So as you said, I'm a product manager at Google. I work with you, Liam, on Google Maps. I've been at Google for about 2.5 years, but I actually started my career in management consulting. So way back in the day, I was a liberal arts undergrad. I decided when I was graduating from undergrad that I wanted to sort of learn more about business. I had always liked games and strategy, like I played chess and poker, and so strategy consulting really caught my eye, just as a place to learn a lot about kind of how the world works and solve these problems. So actually, it was in strategy consulting that I had my first product exposure, although I didn't really know the field of product management at the time.
Yeah.
But we would work with these large corporations, usually on helping them build product roadmaps that connected to an understanding of the consumers, an understanding of the market, and sort of the competitive environment. And so I had that like product bug before I even really knew that it was called product. I just thought this is what we do in consulting. But after I was there for a couple of years, I started to think about what I wanted to do longer term in my career. I knew I was interested in tech. I was interested in consumer products. And so I went to business school at Columbia sort of to help to make that transition.
You had heard kind of about product management before. Was it in business school that interest kind of peaked, and then you heard a lot about it in there, and was kind of your objective of business school to make that pivot, or that's kind of a lot of questions in one?
Yeah, so I think business school is a great place to go for people who are trying to figure out they know they want to make a career transition, and it's helpful to take some time to figure out what they want to do. So I actually did an internship when I was in business school, like more almost on the VC side, at Sony Music, looking at digital investments. I did more like data science work, working at a startup in New York. I took a bunch of classes, including some like engineering and web app development. And so I knew generally the area that I was interested in, but I didn't know what the role was. So actually, I was recruited to join Google in our business org. Google tends to recruit a lot of people for what they've been doing before. So I was a solutions consultant working actually with you on Google Maps. And that ended up being the bridge sort of between more operations and strategy and kind of the product and consumer work that you were doing, or I saw you doing on a day-to-day basis, that really clicked for me that, I think product management is where I want to be.
I think what everyone is going to be curious about is, how did you do it? How, that's like the number one question, right? It's like, oh, your story is nice, but all right, but how'd you do that? I want to do that too. And maybe dive into what was kind of your strategy on how you were going to make that transition, and then what did you do that was different than what other people did?
Sure. So I think there's really 3 parts to this. Like the first, and I think honestly the most important mindset shift is I was very unbound by like what my role was on paper and what the org chart said, right? So I think I just started honestly more for my own interest and learning and sort of just hypothesis testing for myself, doing product management like things whenever I could. So trying to run live experiments with users, get engineers to play with some of our ML tech, and just working very closely with product managers like yourself and trying to have an opinion on what would I build if I were in your shoes, or what should we be building? Mm-hmm. So that was very much just making my role what I wanted it to be. And I think a lot of that gave me the ability to flex some PM muscles early.
Gotcha.
The second thing is more the formal education. I think a lot of people probably know this, but I bought a book on algorithms. I tried to just like deep dive my own understanding of how tech works, and so that took asking questions of people at work, but also like formally kind of studying the PM interview and understanding how tech products work. And then the third thing that I did was an internal rotation. So at Google, we're allowed to take these 20% rotations, and that was a chance to actually be a product manager, at least on a part-time basis. So I already had some great connections with PMs like yourself from my core job, and started looking for opportunities to step in and take a more kind of formal role as a product manager.
How about going through, so you did this rotation, how did you propose you were going to do the rotation? Like, was that something that there was some pre-existing, like we're at Google and most companies are not like Google, but did you talk to your manager? Did you write a proposal? Like, how did you bring that up without sounding like I'm, if you don't give me this rotation, I'm going to quit, type situation?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So the first is what I was talking about before in terms of kind of like flexing muscles in my core role. I had already been working very closely with another PM on our team, Francisco, in setting up this basically operational workflow that we put an ML process in front of and doubled the efficiency overnight.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think, and that was really like, let me play with our internal tools, let me see, and talking to engineers who were on my team to say like, hey, this is what I'm working on, and people, you say the words ML, like people want to jump in.
Yeah.
So I think like I had done enough that gave the team that would host my rotation confidence that I could do the role, or at least that they would sort of take a shot on me. And at the same time, I had also talked to my manager about this longer term, at least interest, not necessarily, it wasn't necessarily even like a focused direction, like I know I want to do this, but it was definitely a strong hypothesis. And so saying to her, like the things that I'm most interested in are like anything that can get me closer to product decision making, working more closely with the PMs that our team interfaces with, and so some of the like less maybe of the like internal organizational stuff and more of the consumer product facing stuff.
Gotcha.
So she was quite supportive of me as well, and I think on both of those fronts I was also lucky to have people who were willing to help me sort of move towards my career ambitions.
So it sounds like you kind of kept talking about product, you kept talking to PMs, you kept acting like a PM.
You make me sound very pushy, but
you did everything that is a PM essentially without the title of being a PM, and then it sounds like it kind of just made sense to do this rotation. Going through the rotation, were there some things that you didn't expect, some things you did? Like, what was kind of your experience going through that rotation? Did you like it? Did you not like it?
So this might be particular to Google in that I was basically doing this rotation in addition to a full-time job.
Oh God.
It definitely was an investment of time, but I would say it was the thing that for me made this career path click and make me confirm for myself that this is what I wanted to do. I would say the biggest surprise is just the kind of implicit change in authority that you get from being, even on a rotation, from being the product manager on the product, right? I think the way that our organization is set up, product managers are called upon to make a lot of calls. And obviously we want to do that like in full consultation with certainly our engineering partners, but also legal and operations and the other user research. But I think I was surprised at just how quickly stepping into the rotation and just having that title of you're the product manager now completely changed
Oh, really?
like the way that I was able to mobilize the organization.
Okay.
So that was also like really exciting, but a little bit scary, especially just trying it out for the first time.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Just a slight title tweak can completely change the mindset of everyone else around you. I don't know what that says about other people, but whatever. Now, going out of that rotation, it didn't guarantee that you would get a role as being a product manager. you still had a process that you had to go through. So I'm curious, what was that process, and how did you prepare for going through that, and kind of what would be your advice to others going through a similar kind of situation of transferring into product?
Yeah, that's right. So at Google, in addition to doing a rotation, and I think most importantly, having a team that is supportive of you being a PM and wants to hire you as a PM, in addition to all of that, you do have to go through the general candidate screening of interviews and go to our Google hiring committee with your packet of work that you've done. So literally sending them product requirement docs that you've written, technical specs that you've worked on, user research that you've collaborated on, strategies and your ability to pitch and sell the vision that you're proposing. All of that goes together in a packet to the hiring committee. And I think of that, the hardest piece is actually preparing for the interviews. So you've done a lot of content on this yourself, but there are a range of different interviews that you need to be prepared to perform on. And your performance in those interviews, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's something like 70% of the overall decision of whether or not you actually make the transfer internally.
Wow. Okay. So it is, even if you have the rotation, it really still comes down to the interviews.
Right. And I should say, I know there's a lot of people out there, and sort of the audience that we're thinking of here are people who are trying to break into product. Like, there are many ways in which I feel that I got very fortunate, right?
Yeah.
Fortunate to have a supportive manager who was willing to let me spend some time on this. Very fortunate to have a team that was willing to host and sort of take a shot on me. And then I also think, I've seen really good candidates get screened out because of a bad interview. So I also feel like lucky that things worked out for me to get through.
How did you do your interview prep? Like, if it is that important and that critical, even for a rotation, what were some strategies that you would suggest to someone else?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece of the biggest sort of component of the interview prep is the product design. And there, as we've talked about in the past, like, the real thing that they're testing for is creativity and problem solving. So I think that is just a muscle that you can work to build. So think about the products that you're interacting with in your own life and what is good about them, what is bad about them, what's delightful or surprising or different from what else is in the market. And I think once you start with that muscle, that becomes a really useful lens for solving all kinds of problems, even things that are, far out technology that doesn't exist today.
And for, like, what were you doing specifically to prepare? Like, were you doing mock interviews? Were you Googling questions? Like, kind of what would be the list of things that you would tell someone else? You need to do these things or else you're completely screwed out of this.
Yeah, so I think starting with a good framework and starting with an approach is always good to have a foundation. But then I definitely did a number of mock interviews, including with you. So thank you again for your time on that. And getting feedback, I think, from real PMs, in my experience, was much more beneficial than doing mocks just with friends. Because I think it's very easy to feel like you're doing a good job in a design interview and not actually be doing a good job in a design interview.
Yeah.
But what I would actually do in addition to the mocks is basically take an example, like, design a smart shoe, and try to come up with very, very creative customer segments. And then for those customer segments, understand, like, deeply what are those customer segments' pain points with the product, and design a bunch of ideas for that. And then I'd go and choose a different customer segment or a different pain point and do it again. And I think just going through that loop of, like, let me take the same product, right, like the smart shoe, and I'm going to design a version for hikers. I'm going to design a version for scuba divers. I'm going to design a version for people who, sprain their ankle. And if you come up with creative segments, then, and go from there, like, really deeply understanding the customer and the need, then that muscle of, like, who am I building for? What is their problem? How can I solve it? Is the thing that I think sort of was the breakthrough for me in the design questions.
Interesting. So you would go through and this would be your kind of exercise, and you would just go through and start randomly thinking of, okay, smart shoe for hikers, smart shoe for X, Y, and Z. And how would you write that down, or, like, say that aloud, talk to a wall, to your friends?
I think I started writing, but
Okay.
that's an exercise that you and I could do here in 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I worked on is like it's very easy to fill a lot of space without actually getting to the meat of the problem. So for me, it was actually easier to just kind of sit and like with this structure of like I need to think of a specific user, I need to really understand their problems, and I need to solve for those. It was easier for me to just sit and spend 20 minutes and go through a couple of reps, almost like you're at the gym, trying to get that habit down and really like zoom in on like what can I come up with here that's going to be different than what everyone else would say, right? Like step counting, everyone's going to say step counting because there's no real user, right? It's just a generic kind of idea in isolation. Well, I will say also in terms of the interview preparation, I did try to be reasonably structured. So I had kind of a target date that I knew I wanted to go for interviews. It took a couple months of preparation because I also had to study up on the technical piece, which I'm happy to talk more about. So what I tried to do was just schedule at least one mock with like a calibrated PM every week, and then set aside, maybe 2 nights for myself to do a little bit of work as well.
You mentioned the technical part.
Sure.
How technical do you need to be?
Yeah, so
how did you prepare maybe?
So I have mixed feelings about this.
Okay.
So from an on-paper perspective, I am not technical, right? I had a liberal arts undergrad, I studied poli-sci. So in the kind of Google way of thinking about it, like either you're a technical background or not, I would be not. But I did do quite a lot of data analysis in my first job and actually got like really drawn into that. Ended up doing a boot camp in Python for 12 weeks. And like even this morning was helping one of my engineers with a little bit of Python in one of our internal tools. So like I certainly am not, don't consider myself like a very proficient coder, but I think I have some background in data science and ML that happens to be very useful on the teams that I work on, because we work with a lot of algorithm teams who are making large scale changes to map data, and we have to understand how do we evaluate the quality of the changes that we're making. We're using sort of machine learning and data science terminology, and it's very helpful for me to understand how do we trade off between precision and recall in this context, or those kinds of technical decisions. At the same time, like my front end experience is very limited, right? Like, a short course and a little bit of tinkering. And so I think, you don't need to know everything, but you need to know enough to be able to contribute in the domain that you're in. And so I think I'm fortunate in that the technical background that I do have aligns well with what my engineering team needs and gives me enough credibility to work effectively with them.
So maybe some quick, like, I think some people would be curious, like, so could you code an app?
I have coded a clunky app.
Okay.
With a lot of copy paste from Stack Overflow. But
Okay.
So the technical interview at Google now for PMs is usually not a coding interview. So I did get that algorithms book and like read up a little bit on algorithms, but it tends to be now much more about systems design. So can you sketch out the high level architecture of an app, either a real app, right, like a Google product, or maybe a system that the engineer is positing to you in the interview that you're going to design real time and do the product work you would normally do, like understanding the customer needs and the technical requirements to support it. So it tends to be more high level, but they do drill down into individual parts of the system. So they might ask sort of what are the inputs and outputs of this API, or what kind of database would you use for this, or how would you make sure that this system was secure against threats. And so knowing, I would say that was definitely an area that I did have to study up on and do the same thing that I talked about from the design perspective, which is try to understand, like, how is the news feed generated on Instagram?
Mm-hmm. It sounds like, in a way, that how you prepare almost is combine it with like your curiosity of something. you're asking like, how does this work, or how do I design X for Y? Like, it sounds like one could just go and find those questions and try to answer them methodically, but it sounds like you have a bit of curiosity too, and like, I actually don't know how that works. I'm going to go try and figure that out. Would you say that's like a part of that is that curiosity?
Yeah, absolutely. And that just might also be, and it actually connects back to the very first thing I was saying about kind of flexing product skills is part of my day job. It's like, that's what's going to get me like interested and excited and learning. And that's what keeps me motivated. Like sitting down and studying a textbook is not really, at least for me, a very effective way. And you also end up with very siloed knowledge, I think, if you take that approach. Whereas if you start from, here's my base level understanding of how this thing works, and start filling in gaps from there, I feel like that's a better way of sort of building a holistic understanding.
So we have one more question.
Sure.
And that is, what are the highs and the lows of being a PM? And to just bonus question on there, did you make the right choice? Or do you want to go back? Like, does this suck?
So I mean, my calendar is definitely more full these days.
Okay.
But I would say I absolutely made the right choice. Like
okay.
I really, really love the engineering teams that I'm working with. Like, I think it's a super fun role that gets to pull together, all of these interesting parts of what it takes to build a product that billions of people are going to use and love. So I find that really motivating and exciting. I would say the lows are certainly the meeting load is tough, and I think I'm still working through just the responsibility of having to make a lot of calls. I think I feel good if I have some evidence that I can point to, the input of people around me. But I think just as a product manager at Google, especially given where we are in the org, our scope tends to be pretty broad. And so a lot of questions come to you, often without that much context. So one of the things that I'm still working on is like, how do I get better at fast decision making that's going to unblock teams based on some, hopefully based on some solid decision making approach that doesn't just feel like I'm shooting from the hip.
So that's the last of the relevant questions. There are a couple just rapid fire questions that I have for you.
Let's do it.
Some which I may skip because they're completely irrelevant, but so you're bored on a Sunday evening at home and hungry. What is your snack of choice and activity that you're doing on a lazy Sunday?
So I actually have an example from this weekend, which is we were walking around my neighborhood. I live in Brooklyn. There's a new Spanish store that has all kinds of like goodies from Spain.
Okay.
I studied abroad in Spain. I'm a big fan of Spanish and Spanish food, and one of the foods in the north of Spain are pinchos, which is basically like toasted bread with any salty, delicious thing you can put on it. So it's like canned fish or peppers. So this Sunday we just basically cut up a loaf of bread and like put all this different stuff on there. Delicious.
Okay. All right. So toasted bread. That's
you guys should try it.
Toast. Yeah, there we go. Spotify or Apple Music?
Spotify for sure. I've been a long time Spotify fan.
Gotcha. What's like the one reason why Spotify over Apple Music?
I think personalization. Like they know my music taste and tastes so well that it would be very hard for me to leave, because actually almost a little sadly, like I don't even know what I like anymore. Right? Like back in the day I was like big into like this specific band, like, oh, track number 3, you got to check it out.
Yeah.
And I think like Spotify has almost gotten so good at personalization that they've removed that thought process. Now it's just like, I know, put on a playlist that's based on some music I like, and like they've got it down. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have an Android or an iPhone?
I have an iPhone.
What, like the latest iPhone, a couple generations behind?
So the latest, as of a couple weeks ago, it was getting pretty slow.
Gotcha.
But I do get a lot of pushback internally for having the iPhone.
All right. Why do you have an iPhone versus an Android?
Why do I have an iPhone?
Like one reason.
I think probably just power of habit.
Okay.
I think just familiarity with the feel of it.
Gotcha. Favorite airline?
Favorite airline? So many great options.
What are you loyal to?
I'm loyal to Delta. Although we were doing some trip planning, looking at the post-COVID time period, and realizing these points are not worth very much.
That's It's all a game.
It is all a game.
It's all a scam. How many dogs should the average person have in New York City?
Oh, at least one.
At least one. What's too many?
I'd say 3 is probably too many.
3 is too many dogs.
You got to get one dog, and then you get a dog for your dog, and then I think you're good.
And they kind of they take care of each other.
Exactly.
Great. Okay.
I have one dog for the record.
All right, so you're gonna get another one.
Thinking about it.
We'll see. Would you rather take a nap on a subway or go swimming in the Hudson?
Ooh, what season is it?
Let's say it's summer.
Both the Hudson and the subway change a lot season to season.
They're both in the summer.
Okay, both in the summer. I'm going Hudson.
Okay, all right. Swim in the Hudson. It's pretty gross. Okay.
Although subway in the summer, that's pretty gross.
Yeah. It's kind of warm in there. Yeah, that's fair. All right. Cool.
Thanks a lot.
That's the interview. Thank you, Justin, for your
Awesome.
time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We've had a great time in the train car that we're in right now.
Oh yeah, you subliminally messaged Subway, and I still didn't take the bait.
You didn't take the subway bait.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right. Cool, man.
Appreciate it.
I don't know how to
Stop.
without